Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I want to talk to you guys about the new Revendreth Covenant abilities for Warlocks, and just as a whole, in general. Now, I did want to get this video out last night to you guys. My apologies, it didn't happen. If you're watching on stream, which, by the way, if you're not, it really should be, here's a link to it somewhere down here below. I lost my character that I got to max level on Alpha right at the very end of stream. There's some bug going on in a certain part of Revendreth where if... I'm not exactly sure what it is. I can't log on to that character anymore. So I lost the Covenant abilities. But the good thing is I made a new character today, level 258 or so. I have both Covenant abilities. So now we can finally make this video. So I want to show you guys the actual visuals of the spell, both the teleport as well as the Impending Catastrophe dot that it puts out, the explosion, things like that. And talk about both of them and what implications they might have in certain raid encounters, scenarios, Mythic Plus, and just go from there. Once again, I do stream on Twitch 5 to 6 days a week. All my week auras, add-ons, profiles are there available for you for free. If you want to swing by, feel free to drop a follow while you're there, or if you just want to hang out and watch any Shadowlands Alpha streaming, feel free to do so. So without wasting any more time, let's get right into this and talk about the new Revendreth Covenant-based abilities. Alright, so following suit with how every Covenant works, we get one class-specific ability, and we get one generic Covenant-based ability. The first one I want to talk about here is the Revendreth Venthyr one called Door of Shadows. It has a 35-yard range on a 1.5-second cast with a 1-minute cooldown. It says you wend through the shadows, appearing at targeted location. This ability is essentially a blink of sorts. It has a cast time, but 35 yards is a pretty big range. Keep in mind, Demonic Gateway is 40 yards. And this ability sort of reminds me of like actual blink combined with the Void Elf racial. It is pretty similar to the Void Elf racial. This ability can have a lot of it can be really impactful in certain spots. For example, skipping certain packs in Mythic Plus, something along the lines of a pseudo shroud at times. A really interesting thing to think about as well as, obviously we're comparing this to a BFA fight, but think of this ability, 35 yards is a pretty long range. Think of this ability on a fight like Mythic Unat that had the beams that came out that dealt a tremendous amount of damage and was one of the bigger healing checks on that fight. Having the entire raid being Venthyr for Door of Shadows on a 1-minute cooldown sort of invalidates that mechanic, sort of invalidates those beams. So this trait, which is generic, it's not even the class-based one, has a lot of potential implications both in PvE and PvP. I think we'll see this a good bit in Mythic Plus. As well as raiding, there's a lot of opportunities for min-maxing movement optimization in raiding. But I think a lot of it is going to come down to what the actual class-specific Covenant-based ability is. Now, when we start to get into the actual class-specific Covenant abilities, we've seen Scouring Tide from Kyrian, the Bastion-based Covenant at this point. This is the Revendreth Venthyr one. It's called Impending Catastrophe. It has a 1.8-second cast currently on Alpha, probably affected by haste, a 1-minute CD, and a 30-yard range. It calls forth a cloud of chaotic anima that travels towards the target enemy, dealing 905 shadow damage, it'll vary depending on gear and things like that, to enemies in its path. So that means that, say your pet is tanking an actual mob 15 yards away, and you're targeting that one, and you have a mob beating on you, like actually right in front of you, it'll deal damage to the mob in front of you while traveling to your target, which is 20 yards in front of you. It's pretty impressive when it comes to Mythic Plus. If you sort of target the mob in the back of the pack, it's going to deal travel damage to all those enemies. It's relevant. And 900 damage is a decent bit on Alpha right now. It accounts for a pretty substantial amount of damage. When the anima reaches the target, it explodes, inflicting either Curse of Weakness or Curse of Tongues, and dealing 2,600 shadow damage over 12 seconds to all nearby enemies. So there was a recent change to this. This ability used to apply a random curse, which as a Warlock, it's Weakness, Tongues, Recklessness, or Doom. It was changed in the most recent Alpha build to either apply Weakness or Curse of Tongues. So Recklessness, I mean, let's be real here. Curse of Doom is a minute-long curse, essentially. In Mythic Plus, in most AoE-based scenarios, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of value out of Curse of Doom being applied to random targets, so I think that's a good change. And when it comes to Recklessness, it is a buff, a 5% bonus melee damage buff. It's impactful, but let's say in a large Mythic Plus pool, which might not even be a thing anymore with target capping, but let's just say in a large AoE-based pool, having it pop and put Recklessness on 3, 4, 5 targets might spell disaster for your tank or just healer, things like that. So I think the change to Weakness and Tongues is solid. They're both the utility, like the pseudo-utility defensive kind of traits. Tongues does currently update. If it's applied mid-cast, it will slow the remaining duration of that cast. The interesting thing here, well, there's a few things. One of them is that if you have a previous curse, like let's say you have Recklessness rolling on a target, or Doom rolling on a target, casting Impending Catastrophe, and whether that's your main target or one that gets AoE'd on, will override that curse. So this puts you in a really weird spot. If you choose Venthyr as your main covenant, and that's something I'll get into later in this video, if you choose Venthyr as your main covenant, you're essentially sort of, as long as you want to cast this ability on a 1 minute CD, I gotta be honest with you, it deals a good bit of damage. It's going to remove your Curse of Doom if you have it on a target. If you're the Warlock that applies Recklessness, it's going to remove that as well and apply either Tongues or Weakness. So it puts you in a really odd spot. Like I said, I'll get more into this later on in the video, but we know that there's already going to be, there's speculation that balancing these Covenant-based abilities is going to be an absolute nightmare. There's 2 AoE-based abilities for Warlocks and 2 pseudo single-target ones, even though Scouring Tithe has some AoE implications at certain points. That's really interesting. I'm not sure. I feel like it's a simple change. If there's a curse already applied to a target or a mob that it hits, or the one you're targeting, just leave it alone. Leave it the way it is. I think it's a pretty simple fix. We'll see if that ends up being the case. But there's also something else. It doesn't smart curse. So I've seen Weakness go on casters. I've seen Tongues go on melee mobs. And yes, there are times that casters and actual enemies in the world do indeed melee. I saw it put Curse of Weakness on a mob that was casting Greater Heal mid-cast. It doesn't smart curse currently. I think it's a pretty simple change. If they have a mana bar, you put Tongues on it. If it doesn't, you put Weakness on it. And like I said, some actual caster mobs do indeed melee at times, but for the most part, that would probably fix the actual ability. Well, it's not broken, but it would help improve the ability overall. I do think from a Mythic Plus standpoint, this is still going to be strong. The higher you go, whether it's fortified or tyrannical, a 1 minute CD is not very long. I mean, think of it as like our Tyrant currently on live, and having it apply Weakness or Tongues to all the mobs that you're pulling. This ability is not target capped. It'll apply to 1, 2, 3, or 8,000 mobs as long as they're within the range of that initial target. Whenever it explodes on them, it will apply to all of them. So there's a lot of utility with this spell in Mythic Plus. It also does complement our AoE toolkit a good bit, which is a bit of a concern. I mean, Demonology still has a pretty good single target, as well as a very good stacked AoE cleave toolkit with Demonic Strength, Hand of Gul'dan, Implosion, Bombers, etc. And Destro does swerve too, but it's important to keep in mind also that Destro and Affliction are going back to 3 minute CDs on your Infernal and your Dark Lair. Affliction also was lacking a bit when it comes to the AoE trash department, but we have Rapture to hopefully shore that up a bit. Either way, we're losing Essences, we're losing Corruption, we're losing Azerite, but Impending Catastrophe, the dot that it puts out, 2700 damage over 12 seconds is a lot on Alpha right now, and it's over 12 seconds on a 1 minute CD. I do see this being pretty impactful when it comes to Mythic Plus, much more so than the Scouring Tithe ability from the Bastion Kyrian-based Covenant. You can get a lot of value out of Scouring Tithe, mostly for Affliction. Let's be real here, it's pretty hard to leverage the actual shards for Demonology when you're in combat and you have things flying and random refunds. And Destro can sort of leverage and use the actual shard refunds too. Affliction gains the most value though. If you're able to time it and go into a new pack at 5 shards, essentially, you're going to be able to get your dots up quickly, spam multiple Raptures. But Impending Catastrophe gives you that pseudo burst damage pretty quickly when you go into a pack. Now, something that's sort of interesting and also worth mentioning is that Curse of Doom right now allows you to actually cast Malefic Rapture as Affliction, but it doesn't register it, I suppose, as an actual dot. Therefore, it doesn't deal any damage. It's sort of weird. So Malefic Rapture works like this. You have to have an actual dot active on the target or a target. Technically, once you have a dot rolling on a mob, you can deselect it, cast your Rapture, and it will still hit that mob that has dots rolling on it. If you apply Curse of Doom, it allows you to cast Rapture, but it doesn't deal any damage. Curse of Weakness, Recklessness, and Tongues don't even allow you to cast Rapture. So it probably isn't super relevant at this point. It's probably just some kind of bug with Curse of Doom because it's the only one that deals damage, even though it's like, there's probably some kind of weird internal bug there. But there's no sequencing you can really follow going like Catastrophe into Rapture. because all the dots you have the option of applying don't trigger Rapture at this point. Now, obviously, you probably will still open up on the sequencing of, like your Seed into your Agonies, Vile Taint you're playing it, and then Rapture, but you also want to get your Catastrophe rolling early on, too. So maybe there's some kind of, like, precast Seed into precast Rapture travel time. Sorry, not Rapture, Catastrophe travel time. I'm not really sure, but it sort of is worth keeping in mind moving forward that it does not count towards Tongue's Weakness, Recklessness, even Doom. They don't count towards the actual dot count increased damage that Rapture could be dealing as Affliction. They don't work that way. Thanks for watching, though, guys. I hope this video gave you all a better look at the Revendreth Covenant, well, I guess the ability both for Warlocks and just the baseline teleport in general. I do think the teleport is secretly pretty OP. A 35-yard range is a long, it's a lot. Our gateway is 40 yards. It's pretty impactful. And on a 1-minute CD, it allows for a pretty good bit of skips or mechanic cheesing at times, depending on what it is, as well as Impending Catastrophe being pretty strong for Warlocks in general, in Mythic Plus and AoE, I guess, base scenarios. Once again, all my week auras, profiles, add-ons are available for you for free on Twitch. I stream 5 to 6 days a week, so if you want to swing by, feel free to grab those. Drop a follow while you're there, and swing by for some alpha, Shadowlands alpha / I guess BFA farm content at this point. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, feel free to smash the subscribe button. It helps out a lot, and I will see you all again on stream soon. Peace.